Hey, I told you it's fine. If you're so worried, why don't you handle it yourselves? However, it'll be nothing to do with me even if anything goes wrong.
Mr. Thompson, the son of the CEO, frowned at us and walked away. While organizing documents with my colleague, Ms. Smith, we found an absurd contract. Definitely, Mr. Thompson's signature was on the document. No matter how much we insisted on double-checking with the other party, Mr. Thompson wouldn't listen. Even if we report this to our boss, we might get blamed eventually because the boss is afraid of the title of Mr. Thompson as the CEO's son. We concluded that taking action ourselves would be better, but we couldn't think of the best solution right away. Just then, Ms. Smith, who had been looking down, suddenly raised her head and grabbed my hand tightly. "My name is Ethan Parker. I work as a salesperson at the trading company. I'm not particularly outstanding, but for some reason, my colleagues often rely on me. With two younger brothers, it seemed that I developed a habit of paying attention to others and offering help. Because of that, I might be somewhat trustworthy, as I notice small changes quickly and offer some help if someone seems in trouble. Despite the busy days, I enjoy working with my colleagues. One day, a new guy named Mr. Thompson was transferred from the overseas branch. Apparently, he's the CEO's son, and from his first day, the managers were unusually attentive to him. His initial greeting was sharp and didn't leave a bad impression. Plus, since he worked overseas, I assumed he was competent. However, that was a huge mistake. Mr. Thompson was less capable than employees who joined that year. Often, he'd disappear from his desk, only to be found lounging in the break area. Despite barely touching his computer and not preparing any materials, he'd leave the office claiming he had a business meeting. I thought he was just slacking, but then we found a contract with Mr. Thompson's signature while organizing documents. I wondered how he managed to secure contracts, suspecting he used his title as the CEO's son with clients, which made me sigh. The other colleagues complained to our managers about Mr. Thompson not doing any work, but they didn't take any action, fearing he'd report them to the CEO. Although we had an additional employee, the workload didn't decrease, leading to growing frustration. One day, with an important business meeting approaching, I stayed late to prepare. After greeting my colleagues, I gathered the documents for preparation and returned to my office floor, only to find Mr. Thompson there. Doubting he'd stay for overtime, I cautiously approached and saw he was talking to someone. Peeking in, I realized it was Ms. Smith, who was cornered by Mr. Thompson. I haven't had much interaction with her before, and she isn't showy in appearance or personality. So it took me a little while to recall her name. Mr. Thompson hadn't noticed me and continued harassing Ms. Smith.
Hey, where's your answer? I told you to handle this work. You're ugly. You finished your task at least.
It seemed Mr. Thompson was trying to dump his work on her. She clutched her hands in front of her chest, looking down without responding. This was probably not the first time. Mr. Thompson was definitely taking the credit for the work that Ms. Smith worked so hard on while going out on sales calls. I couldn't watch any longer and decided to confront Mr. Thompson.
"Mr. Thompson, I heard what you said. You finish your own work. It's understandable if you help her, but you're just dumping everything on her, as I heard what you just said."
Huh? Give me a break. She's taking my work for me voluntarily. Right, Smith?
Ms. Smith flinched when Mr. Thompson glared at her. She seemed terribly scared and nodded weakly. Mr. Thompson looked at me triumphantly, but I couldn't just stand by and watch him bully her.
"What is her own will? You're just intimidating her. How can you take pride in pushing your work onto others like that?"
However, My words didn't seem to affect Mr. Thompson at all, and he laughed it off, calling it a false accusation. In the end, no matter what I said, he skillfully dodged and quickly slipped away. I sighed. Ms. Smith, who was still there, apologized frantically.
I'm really sorry for causing trouble. It's been like this since Mr. Thompson was transferred here. I can't refuse because most of the deadlines are tight. If he leaves it, there is no choice but finishing it. I talked to the manager, but nothing changed. I've just got used to it.
Seeing Ms. Smith smile painfully made my chest feel tight.
Well, let me help you if you are okay. My tasks have more flexible deadlines.
Ms. Smith shook her head vigorously as I asked. I kept offering the help. Eventually, she gave in. Since this incident, I stayed late with Ms. Smith, helping her with the work Mr. Thompson dumped on her. She always looked apologetic, so I tried to reassure her with a smile that she doesn't need to worry. However, I had never seen her smile back. Determined to change the situation, I decided to report to our manager, hoping both our testimony would prompt the action. As I saw the manager leaving his desk, I stepped into the hallway to approach him. At that moment, Mr. Thompson suddenly stopped me. I turned back reluctantly. Mr. Thompson, smirking, approached me.
Hey, you're not thinking of reporting this to the manager, are you? You mouthed off to me the other day. But remember, my dad's the CO here. If you get too full of yourself, you'll find yourself out of a job.
As his intimidating presence left me speechless, he walked away, snorting. I realized that my colleagues who went through this might have been threatened this way too, and I understood why they accepted these situations. Though I doubted he'd actually do anything to us, I decided to keep an eye on things while helping Miss Smith. Feeling pathetic for my cowardice, I kept telling myself to endure it for now. After a while, Ms. Smith invited me out for dinner as a token of appreciation. She had already booked a private room at a restaurant. So I gladly accepted her invitation. After I finished work and called out to her, she asked me to go ahead without her. Wondering what was going on, I obediently left the office as she had told me she'd catch up soon. I walked slower than usual so she could catch up. As I walked without thinking, I reached the large intersection in front of the bus stop, and I heard a small voice from behind me. As I got startled to turn around, I found a woman I didn't recognize. Her loose, wavy black hair was glossy. Her large, beautiful eyes were mesmerizing. I stared in awe for a moment, but quickly came back to myself and asked,
Is something wrong?
She blushed and said bushfully,
It's me, Smith.
I couldn't believe her words and stood there with my mouth open. Then she gently took out her glasses to wear. They cover those large eyes. Her familiar face revealed. I was still stunned. However, I realized we couldn't just stand there. We continued walking without any conversations. When we arrived at the restaurant behind the bus stop, we were shown to the private room by the staff. After ordering our first drinks and appetizers in an awkward atmosphere, I finally managed to speak.
Well, honestly, you look prettier without your glasses. Why do you hide it?
She smiled sadly at my words and began to talk about the past as she was staring at the cocktail that had just been served. She explained that she had been very pretty since childhood and had been adored by adults. She was also being looked at with envy by the other kids. While she was happy about it when she was little, envy turned into jealousy as she grew older. The piercing stares made her feel fearful. However, as she didn't want to give up, she suppressed her fears and continued to go to school, working diligently at everything she did. As a result, she won awards in music and sports to become the top student at her school. But the evaluation from those around her was harsh. The recognition she deserved with her efforts was marred by malicious rumors that her achievements were only due to her look. It deeply saddened her that her hard work wasn't genuinely acknowledged. After graduating high school, she deliberately started dressing plainly. She seemed to think that was the only way to avoid being judged by her appearance. For the first time in her life, she experienced her hard work being appreciated without her appearance. Apologizing for casually mentioning her looks despite knowing her story, she gave a little smile and shook her head.
I'm sorry too. For dragging you into Mr. Thompson's mess. I'm so appreciative for your helping me continuously without a single complaint. I realized I felt guilty for hiding this part of myself from you. So I decided to tell you everything.
Her small hands trembled as she spoke. It must have taken immense courage to reveal her true self.
Thank you for confiding in me. I'm sorry if I made you feel pressured. And, when I said you look prettier now, it was just a personal preference. You're still you no matter how you look. All your hard work and achievements are yours alone. Let people say whatever they want. I'll be cheering you on all the way.
She widened her eyes in surprise. And then, she gave me a gentle smile as if one flower was slowly blooming. Her smile was so beautiful that I couldn't help but stare. From that day on, I continued to help her deal with the work Mr. Thompson dumped on her. Even though she dressed plainly as usual, thinking back to that day always made my heart race. While I was sorting through the disorganized documents again today and wondering how they could have been left in such a state, Ms. Smith approached me with a pale face. She was holding a contract. As soon as I read its contents, I felt the blood drain from my face too. It was a renewal contract with a certain client, but the problem was that there were rumors this company was soon pulling out of that business. The person in charge should have heard about this, but for some reason, the contract was renewed as usual. If the rumor turned out to be true, it would cause significant problems for other clients waiting for this company's products. In the worst case, we would be held accountable for substantial losses. Mr. Thompson's name was clearly on the signature line of the contract. Ms. Smith and I discussed it and decided to talk to Mr. Thompson about it the next day. However, Mr. Thompson insisted that everything was fine because he had renewed the contract after the proper discussion. He wouldn't listen to us seriously. When we pleaded with him to double-check, he sighed loudly in irritation.
I told you it's fine. If you're so worried, why don't you handle it yourselves? However, it'll be nothing to do with me even if anything goes wrong.
After saying so, he frowned at us and left. Even if we report this to our boss, we might get blamed eventually because the boss is afraid of the title of Mr. Thompson as the CEO's son. We concluded that we should take action ourselves, but we couldn't think of the best solution right away. Just then, Ms. Smith, who had been looking down, suddenly raised her head and grabbed my hand tightly.
I've always been scared of Mr. Thompson and just ran away, thinking I could endure it. But you stood up and helped me without running away. And when we had dinner together, what you said really encouraged me. So now it's my turn to help. Leave it to me.
Seeing her determination in the eyes, I clenched my fist and nodded firmly. About a week later, I was heading to the conference room with the documents and the contracts in hand. That day, I was meeting with the company that makes similar products as our client who is rumored to be exiting the market. Since then, we had been monitoring the client's situation. It seemed they were indeed pulling out of the business. To avoid inconveniencing other clients, we decided to sign a new contract with the company that could provide similar products for replacement. As I walked, Reviewing the steps in my head, I suddenly heard someone call out behind me. I got startled and turned around to see Mr. Thompson standing there with a crooked smile.
I heard you're signing a contract with a company that makes similar products. Well, thanks for doing the hard work for me. Now, hand over the documents and the contracts.
What? You told us to handle it ourselves. Why now?
Yeah, I said I wouldn't take any responsibility if something went wrong, but I never said I'd let you take the credit. Hand them over. I need the results to convince my dad.
He forcefully grabbed the documents and the contracts from me. As he headed to the conference room, I hurried after him. I was supposed to be the person in charge. Even if Mr. Thompson might take this over, I needed to introduce myself at least. Suppressing my frustration, I followed him into the conference room, where our CEO and Mr. Davis, the CEO of our new client, were waiting. The CEO's face lit up when he saw Mr. Thompson cheerfully greet them.
So, you're the one handling this deal. It's impressive that you managed to persuade such an excellent CEO.
As far as I saw, the CEO had no idea how incapable Mr. Thompson was to handle works. I felt the urge to reveal the truth about Mr. Thompson as he laughed smugly. However, I took a deep breath and waited for the right moment. Then, Mr. Davis tilted his head in confusion.
No, it was Sarah Smith who persuaded me. Actually, she's my niece. Seeing her as a working adult trying so hard to help the company, I decided to lend my support this time. She told me that Mr. Parker is in charge of this deal.
Hearing this, our CEO froze with his eyes wide open. The next moment, the conference room door slowly opened. The sound of footsteps echoed as Ms. Smith entered with her hair down and without her glasses.
Excuse me for the interruption, but there's something I need to tell you, Mr. Thompson. Could you listen to this first?
She handed over a voice recorder to the CEO. The playback revealed a conversation where Ms. Smith had asked the client about the contract renewal. The client's representative sounded genuinely apologetic, saying,
Mr. Thompson wouldn't understand the situation even when explained. We were threatened to renew the contract and have been anxious about it ever since.
As the whole room fell silent, I began to calmly explain Mr. Thompson's tyrannical demeanors so far. I exposed how he shirked all his duties, pushed last-minute tasks onto others, and intimidated them into compliance. Mr. Thompson's face twisted into a strained smile.
What are you guys talking about? And Sarah, is that you? Well, if you had dressed up nicely from the beginning, I would have treated you better. Look, let's end this joke now. If you don't admit it's all lies, my dad will get the wrong idea.
At that moment, something suppressed so long within me burst forth.
What do you mean by that? Are you saying you treat people differently based on their appearance? Ms. Smith is Ms. Smith no matter how she looks. No matter how you try to cover it up now, you can't erase the fact that you've been mistreating her. It's unbelievable that someone who judges others by their looks wants to be a leader. You've said awful things to her, but you're the one who's truly ugly.
As I glared at Mr. Thompson, his face turned pale. The CEO let out a deep sigh and glared at Mr. Thompson.
It seems I need to reconsider whether I should let you to take over the company or not. But first, we both should talk about it.
Mr. Thompson trembled and hung his head as he followed the CEO out of the conference room.
Thank you for your time today.
The CEO shook hands with Mr. Davis and chased after Mr. Thompson. At that moment, I breathed a sigh of relief. This was a gamble that Ms. Smith and I had planned together. We knew the CEO had a habit of greeting new client in person, and we aimed to reveal everything about Mr. Thompson there. We made sure Mr. Thompson knew about today's meeting with Mr. Davis and kept Mr. Davis in the dark to ensure everything went smoothly. As I realized Mr. Davis knew nothing about this whole thing after all these happened, I looked at him and he was looking at me anxiously. Ms. Smith also realized the same thing. As we hurriedly explained the situation, Mr. Davis laughed heartily.
So, you both took advantage of me. I like it. I was always worried about the timid Sarah, but it looks like she'll be fine. And of course, I'll cooperate regarding the new products. Just you know I'm very particular about contract details.
Watching his sly smile, I exhaled and handed over the documents. After that, I successfully signed the contracts with him. Honestly, it was quite challenging, but we managed to find a good compromise. Since then, Mr. Thompson has been receiving constant guidance from the senior employees close to the CEO. The CEO had believed that Mr. Thompson had gained solid experience overseas. Moreover, Mr. Thompson had been reporting the work that Ms. Smith and I did as his own achievements, making him appear competent. Mr. Thompson was sent to work at the overseas branch by the CEO, but he just used his position as the CEO's son to slack off. When he returned, supposedly to start preparing to take over the company, he realized he needed to show results under his father's watchful eye. That's when he came up with the idea of dumping his work on the timid Ms. Smith. The CEO apologized to Ms. Smith and me on behalf of Mr. Thompson. We don't know what the future holds, but we hope Mr. Thompson will change for the better. Since then, Ms. Smith has decided to live without hiding her true self. At first, everyone was puzzled by the sudden change in her appearance. However, soon she was admired as a beauty, and some male colleagues began to approach her. She brushed them off effortlessly, but honestly, it was nerve-wracking to watch. After much deliberation, I made a decision. Feeling my heart beat much faster than usual, I approached Ms. Smith, who was enjoying a leisurely coffee during lunch break.
Hey. Are you free tonight? I have something important to talk about.
When I said this, she looked surprised for a moment, then gave a cute little laugh and nodded. I felt like she already knew, but I was determined to express my feelings properly, and smiled back to her.